The world of entertainment is fascinating, but few know what hides behind the cameras. As a music video editor, I spent years immersed in this universe, working with renowned artists until I was given the opportunity to join Shakira's team. For any editor, it was a dream. However, this dream quickly turned into a nightmare. Her fame wasn't just a product of talent or marketing strategy, but of something much darker. Today, I feel the need to tell the truth, even knowing it could cost me my life. When I started, I thought my work was technical and straightforward, cutting and editing footage, adjusting colors, syncing music. Over time, I realized nothing was as innocent as it seemed. Some orders appeared trivial, like adjusting an angle or adding a light effect. But when observing the final result, I began noticing patterns. Small details, almost imperceptible to the audience, carried messages that seemed to have hidden purposes. My instincts told me something was wrong. The connection between what we edited and real-world events became difficult to ignore. With every video we released, something would happen: protests, scandals, or even tragedies. It was as if the videos were a way of announcing or preparing the ground for these events. Everything was calculated, and Shakira, the artist I admired, seemed to be just a pawn in a much larger game, controlled by forces few dared to confront. What disturbed me most was the sense of contributing to an invisible machine. For years, I blindly followed orders, ignoring the signs. But as I rose within the team, I was exposed to information that confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just music or entertainment, it was mass manipulation, and I, through my edits, was part of it. The moment I decided I could no longer ignore the truth was when I encountered what they called special materials. Symbolic images, geometric patterns, and coded sequences were delivered to be embedded into the videos. Every detail was meticulously planned, and the managers made it clear that mistakes would not be tolerated. I knew I was dealing with something much larger than a simple editing project. For years, I stayed silent. My fear outweighed my will to speak out. But seeing Shakira's fame revived in an almost supernatural way made me realize it was time to act. I could no longer be complicit in a machine that enslaves minds and manipulates the world to serve the interests of a few. That's why I'm sharing my story, not to absolve myself of guilt, but to expose the truth many refuse to see. The entertainment industry isn't just about music, movies, and grand spectacles. Behind the lights and cameras lies a mechanism controlled by an elite with specific objectives. Working as a video editor, I slowly discovered that artists aren't as free as they seem. They are carefully shaped to convey messages, reinforce behaviors, and influence the masses. Shakira was one of these tools, controlled and manipulated to serve the interests of this elite. During my first weeks on the job, I found it curious how the managers treated Shakira. Despite her fame and charisma, she was constantly monitored. Every gesture, every word, and even every facial expression was meticulously planned. They saw her as a product, something to be polished and shaped to achieve objectives far beyond entertainment. Everything about her was calculated, from the choice of clothes to the dance moves that would go viral. Gradually, I realized this wasn't restricted to Shakira. Many artists followed similar patterns. They were trained and conditioned to fit specific narratives. When they started stepping out of line, they were quickly reined in. The industry felt like a prison disguised as luxury. Artists didn't control their careers. The elite did, ensuring their messages always served a greater purpose. Meanwhile, the audience consumes these messages without realizing it. The songs played on the radio, the viral music videos, even the seemingly spontaneous speeches on social media are carefully manufactured. Everything has a purpose: to influence opinions, shape behaviors, and distract people from the real problems of the world. And I, as an editor, was part of this scheme, helping to refine these messages so they would be irresistible and imperceptible at the same time. I reached a point where I could no longer ignore the truth. While working on the videos, I saw the symbols and messages being inserted. They seemed harmless at first glance, but upon closer analysis, I realized they had deep meanings. It was as if each clip was a puzzle only the elite could solve. And the more I understood, the more I realized how deceived the public was. The industry isn't just a profitable business, it's a powerful tool for control. The masses are kept busy with scandals, hits, and spectacles while the elite works on their plans. Artists, who should be free to create and inspire, are used as puppets. And those who dare to step out of line often disappear without a trace. At first, I thought the details I was asked to include in the music videos were merely artistic choices. Small symbols, geometric shapes, and numbers would appear at almost imperceptible moments. The instructions were clear. These elements had to be present in the video, but in a way that no one would consciously notice. It was as if they wanted people to see them without knowing they were seeing them. Only later did I understand that this was the essence of subliminal messaging. I wondered why so much attention was given to such minor details. After all, the audience watched the videos for the rhythm, the dance, the music. Who would notice a strange number or a geometric shape in the background of a scene? But over time, I realized these images weren't meant to be consciously noticed. They were there to penetrate people's subconscious, triggering emotional responses or behaviors they couldn't control. In one of the most popular music videos, I remember inserting a symbol resembling a spiral, almost invisible, in a window's reflection. That was a direct request from the managers, who emphasized its importance. Later, while watching the completed video, I noticed how the spiral appeared at specific moments in the music, synchronized with the points of greatest emotional impact. The intention behind it was impossible to ignore. These messages weren't just experiments. On several occasions, I discovered they were connected to real-world events. Protests, product launches, even entire social movements seemed to arise in sync with the release of music videos. I edited something that seemed harmless, but as I observed the audience's reactions, I saw how the masses were influenced by it. It was like watching collective hypnosis happen before my eyes. I was warned never to question these choices. Any attempt to understand the purpose behind the symbols was met with cold stares and veiled threats. However, my curiosity couldn't be contained. I began researching on my own and discovered that many of the symbols used in the videos had roots in occult practices. They weren't there by chance. They were pieces of a puzzle only the elite fully understood. Today, when I watch music videos, I can identify these messages almost immediately. I see how they are strategically positioned to influence viewers' minds without them realizing it. Knowing this is disturbing because I understand that millions of people are being manipulated every day without having any idea of what's happening. It's such a subtle form of control that few can perceive it, and those who do rarely have the courage to speak about it. The managers who oversaw Shakira's career weren't mere organizers or agents. They were the true controllers of what happened at every stage of production. Their orders were clear, specific, and often made no sense to me. They didn't bother with explanations or justifications. They simply demanded that everything be executed precisely. Initially, I thought this was part of the discipline required to maintain an artist's success. Over time, I noticed something strange about how they operated. Shakira, despite being a global superstar, seemed to have little or no autonomy over her decisions. Everything was controlled by the managers, from her outfits to how she expressed herself in interviews. They discussed strategies as if she were a product, not a person. I always felt there was something inhumane about how they dealt with her and her team. One of the things that bothered me most was how they treated the artists almost as disposable. Shakira was one of the most valuable pieces in their game, but she wasn't treated with respect or consideration. Whenever something didn't go as planned, she was coldly reprimanded, with no room for error. On one occasion, I overheard one of them saying, "She knows her role. If she steps out of line, we can replace her." That stuck in my mind. The managers also had absolute control over the artist's public narrative. When news about her personal life surfaced, it wasn't a coincidence. It was carefully planted or manipulated to distract attention from something bigger. Everything was part of a plan. They knew exactly how to use Shakira's personal dramas to boost her popularity or hide the real objectives behind her projects. It was a manipulation game that disgusted me. The coldness of these managers extended to the technical team as well. There was no room for questions or mistakes. Anyone who showed curiosity or hesitation was immediately replaced. I personally witnessed colleagues being fired without notice, often just for questioning the orders they received. The environment was oppressive, but no one dared to speak about it. We all knew there was something bigger watching over us. Understanding the role of the managers was key to grasping how the elite operated. They were intermediaries, the pawns closest to the artists, ensuring that everything went according to plan. However, they themselves were not at the top of the chain of command. Someone above them gave the orders, and these higher-ups were as inaccessible as they were mysterious. Realizing this made me feel small and powerless in the face of the vastness of the scheme. My initial suspicions began when I noticed a repetition of patterns in the music videos I edited. There was always something that didn't make sense, a symbol, a number, or a sequence that seemed out of place in relation to the song's theme. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as I worked on more projects, the coincidences became too frequent to ignore. Something bigger was happening. The turning point came when I realized that the events depicted in the videos were mirrored in real-world occurrences. In one specific case, a music video featured images of protests and social chaos, and just weeks later, news of uprisings in different countries began to emerge. I was overcome by a sense of déjà vu. It was as if the videos weren't just entertainment, but a kind of manual for what was to come. My curiosity drove me to dig deeper. I began watching old videos I had edited, analyzing every detail that had previously gone unnoticed. I discovered that the repeated symbols and numbers had clear meanings in occult and esoteric cultures. They weren't there by accident. They were coded messages, intended for a specific audience that knew how to decipher them. My initial ignorance was slowly replaced by a feeling of dread. Once, while analyzing one of the videos, I noticed that the symbols coincided with dates and numbers of historical events. It was as if someone was marking territory or sending a warning through the music and videos. I became obsessed with understanding what each detail meant, but I knew that by doing so, I was putting myself in danger. Any misstep could expose me, and I didn't want to draw the manager's attention. My first attempt to talk to a colleague about my suspicions was disastrous. He cut me off sharply and said, "If you want to survive here, it's better not to ask questions." His tone was serious, and I realized it was more than advice, it was a warning. After that, I stayed silent but continued investigating on my own. With every discovery, my fear grew, but so did my certainty that something terrible was happening. Today, looking back, I realized that my initial suspicions were just the tip of the iceberg. Everything I saw and edited was part of a larger plan, something far beyond what I could comprehend at the time. The feeling that I was helping build something so dangerous still haunts me, and that's why I decided to speak out. People need to know that what they consume isn't as innocent as it seems. Everything changed when I was summoned to a private meeting. It was an ordinary morning, and the email simply said I should report to the manager's office without specifying the reason. When I arrived, I was greeted by 3 of them. Their expressions were cold, almost robotic. After a few compliments about my work, they placed a confidentiality agreement on the table. "From now on, what you see and do here can never be discussed with anyone," they said. The contract was extensive, filled with clauses that frightened me. There were explicit threats of legal and even personal consequences if I violated the agreement. But what disturbed me the most was how they verbally reinforced the weight of it. "If you talk, the repercussions won't be limited to your career," one of them said. The threat was clear, but at the time, I still didn't know how far they would go to protect their secrets. I signed the contract with trembling hands. The pay was high, and the possibility of career advancement was tempting. However, deep down, something told me I was stepping into dangerous territory. Shortly afterward, they began assigning me tasks that went beyond my role as an editor. They gave me files to include in the videos, but never explained the purpose. When I asked once, I received a cold stare and the response, "The less you know, the better." Over time, I realized the contract wasn't just a formality. It served as a kind of invisible leash. I was always under surveillance. They knew exactly what I was doing, who I was talking to, and even where I went outside of work. When I started internally questioning the orders, I began to feel constant pressure. It was as if they were always one step ahead, ready to act if I showed any hesitation. The psychological pressure was immense. I would receive messages at odd hours, demanding last-minute changes or asking me to do things that made no sense. When I complained, the response was always the same. "We trust you. Don't let us down." That trust, however, was just a form of manipulation. They alternated between praise and threats, creating a cycle in which I felt trapped, unable to escape or react. Today, when I think about that contract, I realize how it was the perfect trap. They isolated me from any possibility of seeking help or talking about what I knew. The confidentiality wasn't just a professional requirement, it was a tool for control. I was just another pawn in a much larger scheme, and the deeper I got involved, the harder it was to find a way out without facing severe consequences. My understanding of what was happening took a leap when I first heard about MKUltra. A close friend, who also worked in the industry, mentioned the term during a casual conversation, but his tone was serious. He explained that it was a mind control project conducted by governments in the past, but that, according to him, it had never really ended. I was intrigued but also skeptical. I couldn't imagine something so extreme being connected to my work. Over time, I began to see how the concept of mind control made sense within what I observed behind the scenes. Many artists, including Shakira, seemed to behave robotically. Their actions were meticulously programmed, from interviews to live performances. Everything they said or did seemed carefully rehearsed, leaving no room for improvisation. It was as if their true personalities were suppressed, and they were merely avatars for something greater. Once, while editing a music video, I noticed sequences that didn't directly connect to the song or the video's theme. They were quick shots, almost imperceptible, showing disturbing images, geometric figures, eyes that seemed to watch the viewer, and phrases and languages I didn't recognize. After researching, I discovered that many of these images were linked to mind programming techniques, something that fit perfectly with the rumors of MKUltra. As my curiosity grew, my friend warned me again. They use these techniques not only to manipulate the audience, but also to control those in front of the cameras. That left me terrified. I thought artists had some control over their lives, but if what he said was true, they were just as much victims as the public consuming their music. The concept of mind control became impossible to ignore when I began noticing how certain artists changed their behavior after periods of reclusion. They would disappear for months or even years, only to return with completely different personalities. These changes were justified as career reinventions, but to me, they were evidence of something far more sinister. I was witnessing the direct result of what many call reprogramming. Today, I believe that MKUltra not only exists, but is deeply intertwined with the entertainment industry. Artists are molded to become tools of mass manipulation, while the public is hypnotized by subliminal messages that reinforce behaviors and ideas convenient for the elite. Realizing this was one of the scariest moments of my life because I understood that I too was a piece in this scheme. Mass manipulation is one of the central gears of the entertainment industry. Nothing is left to chance. Every song released, every music video, every public appearance by an artist is carefully planned to influence the emotions and behaviors of the audience. Working as an editor, I realized how even the smallest details were used to provoke specific reactions. The goal was never just to entertain, but to control. The manipulation process begins before the audience even notices. For instance, music videos are designed to create emotional peaks at strategic moments. These peaks are synchronized with images and sounds that often contain hidden messages. Once, while reviewing a video, I noticed that an apparently harmless scene of Shakira smiling was overlaid with a sequence of numbers. When investigated, these numbers were linked to dates of significant social events. The impact of these messages on the audience is devastating. By embedding symbols or subliminal sounds, the elite can plant ideas in people's subconscious. This can range from creating sympathy for an artist to inciting entire social movements. On several occasions, I noticed how the release of a music video was followed by a wave of mass reactions, as if the public was responding to an invisible command. These reactions never seem spontaneous. Manipulation also occurs on a large scale through the creation of trends. Often, artists are used to promote ideals or behaviors that align with the elite's interests. When Shakira released her song with empowering lyrics, social media exploded with debates about female independence. While the theme was legitimate, I knew it was part of a larger strategy intended to divert attention from more complex global issues. One of the most disturbing things I witnessed was how manipulation also involved creating artificial crises. In one of the videos, I was instructed to insert images that, at the time, made no sense to me. Only months later did I see those same images being associated with a violent protest that spread across multiple countries. It was as if the music videos were used to prepare the public to accept certain events as inevitable. Today, I understand that the public is not just a passive consumer. They are the primary target of this manipulation. The elite uses music, cinema, and media as tools to shape opinions, dictate behaviors, and keep everyone under control. Knowing this is terrifying because it means that nothing we consume is truly neutral. Everything is designed to keep us distracted while the elite continues with its dark plans. The New World Order has always been dismissed as a conspiracy theory by many, but working in the entertainment industry, I realized this idea was more real than I could have ever imagined. Although the term wasn't used openly, the actions, symbols, and strategies I witnessed made it clear that a group was coordinating everything. They were the invisible force deciding what the public should see, hear, and feel. The most shocking realization was understanding how these invisible ones infiltrated every area of the industry. They weren't just executives or investors. They were figures whose names never appeared, but whose decisions shaped the destiny of artists, companies, and even global events. Everything was done with surgical precision. Every release, every scandal, every social trend was part of a larger strategy. And I was participating in this mechanism without fully understanding its scope. Once, during a meeting, I heard one of the managers mention that the representatives were pleased with the results of a specific music video. They didn't explain who these representatives were, but the tone of reverence in their voices made it clear these people wielded immense power. They not only controlled artists like Shakira, but used their careers as tools to achieve global objectives. It was as if everything was a giant chessboard, and we were mere pawns. The symbols of the New World Order were everywhere: all-seeing eyes, pyramids, repeated numbers. At first, I thought they were coincidences or artistic choices, but I soon realized these elements were deliberately inserted. They carried hidden meanings, used to mark territory or send messages to other members of this elite. The more I analyzed, the more I realized that nothing was there by chance. This elite didn't operate only in music. I saw evidence of their influence in other areas, such as politics, economics, and media. The same patterns of manipulation I witnessed in music videos were also present in commercials, speeches, and even major sporting events. It was as if everything was connected, each piece moving to fulfill a greater purpose that most people couldn't even suspect. Over time, I understood that the New World Order isn't just a conspiracy theory. It's a frightening reality where a few individuals control the fate of billions. They use entertainment as a powerful tool to mold minds, create distractions, and ensure no one notices what's really happening. Knowing this left me in a constant state of paranoia, but it also gave me the certainty that the world we know is a carefully constructed facade. One of the most disturbing experiences of my life was the night I attended a party organized by Shakira's managers. The invitation seemed like recognition for my good work, but something about how it was delivered made me suspicious. They insisted I attend, saying it was an exclusive event, only for those who made a difference. I accepted, curious but also anxious about what I might find. The party took place in a secluded mansion, surrounded by high walls and armed guards. As soon as I entered, I realized this was no ordinary event. There was a tense atmosphere in the air, despite the evident luxury. I recognized several famous faces, artists, producers, and important industry figures. However, their behavior was strange. Many seemed uncomfortable, almost submissive. It was not what I expected from such powerful and influential people. As the night progressed, the tension increased. The lights were dimmed, and one of the managers took the stage to make an announcement. He asked for silence and introduced the guests of honor, masked men who entered the room in complete silence. Their masks were made of thin material, but their eyes seemed to glow behind them. There was something deeply unsettling about their presence, as if they exuded power and danger. These men began to speak, and what they said left me paralyzed. They praised those present for their impeccable work and stated that each of them was part of a larger plan, a plan that was transforming the world. "You are the architects of the future," they said. They spoke about control, manipulation, and how the masses were being shaped through entertainment. It all sounded more like a cult than a corporate speech. The climax of the night was the introduction of a ritual which, according to the organizers, was a tradition among the members of that circle. I can't say for sure what happened because I was overcome with fear. I saw artists being brought to the center of the room, where they knelt before the masked men. There was no resistance. They seemed to accept it as inevitable. It was as if they were completely dominated, unable to question or react. I left the party before it ended, making up an excuse to avoid suspicion. For days, I mentally replayed what I had seen that night, trying to find a logical explanation. But the truth is, there was no logic to it. It was a demonstration of power, a reminder that the elite controls everything and everyone. After that, I realized there was no way to completely escape this system without consequences. I was already marked, and they knew it. Shortly after the party, I began receiving even more disturbing materials to edit. Among them were recordings that seemed to document rituals. At first, I thought they were staged, something to promote a new artistic project. But upon watching the footage, I realized they were real. The details, the sounds, the expressions of the people involved, everything indicated this was no fiction. In one of the videos, I saw what I can only describe as a sacrifice. A central figure, wearing a robe, was surrounded by hooded people. The setting was dark, lit only by candles, and symbols were drawn on the floor. At the center, something or someone was being offered as part of the ritual. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but the images were far too clear to ignore. I was instructed to edit the material, removing parts that showed faces or details that could identify the participants. There were no explanations, just direct orders and a strong emphasis that this was confidential. Every second I spent analyzing those images increased my fear. I knew I was dealing with something far beyond what any ordinary person could imagine. The most terrifying part was how naturally the managers treated these videos. To them, it seemed like just another task. When I delivered the final edit, one of them gave me a cold smile and said, "Good job. Now you understand why trust is so important." Those words echoed in my mind for days. They didn't just trust me. They knew I was trapped in that system, unable to escape. As I edited more materials, I began to realize that these rituals weren't isolated events. They were part of something much larger, something that connected to the symbols I had been inserting into the music videos and the global events that seemed to be premeditated. It was a cycle of manipulation, control, and destruction, all coordinated by this invisible elite. To this day, the images of those rituals haunt me. I can't forget the sounds, the screams, and the empty stares of those who participated. Knowing that I helped conceal these practices fills me with guilt, but at the same time, it gives me the motivation to expose everything I saw. People need to know that the entertainment they consume is tied to something far darker than they could imagine. One of the strangest tasks I received was editing material related to the climate. It was a video that, at first glance, seemed like a documentary. It showed footage of hurricanes, floods, wildfires, and other natural disasters. I was instructed to polish the material, adjusting the colors and syncing soundtracks with the images. However, as I worked on the video, I noticed something disturbing. There were frequent mentions of a project called HARP. The HARP project, as I discovered, was a scientific installation supposedly researching the ionosphere. However, in the documents accompanying the video, it was described as a tool for climate manipulation. The idea was that this technology could create storms, droughts, or even earthquakes in a controlled manner. At first, I thought this was just a conspiracy theory, but the details in the material were incredibly specific. It didn't seem like fiction. While working, I noticed that the video was interspersed with graphics and maps highlighting specific geographic areas. One of the maps showed North America, marking locations where experiments had occurred. Curiously, these points coincided with regions that, at the time, had experienced devastating natural disasters. I began to realize that the video wasn't a typical documentary, but some kind of internal report intended only for elite members. At one point, I was asked to insert a sequence that seemed out of place, satellite images accompanied by coded text. Later, I discovered that these texts indicated activation orders for climate events. That's when I realized the natural disasters that so deeply impacted the world weren't so natural after all. They were planned and executed as part of a larger scheme of control. Climate manipulation served multiple purposes. Beyond causing destruction, these events kept populations distracted and in a constant state of panic. When people are focused on surviving floods or wildfires, they have less energy to question what's happening behind the scenes. The elite used this as a powerful tool to maintain their dominance, while the public suffered, unaware they were being manipulated. After editing that material, I could never look at natural disasters the same way again. Every time I see news about hurricanes or floods, I wonder if they were truly caused by nature or orchestrated by these invisible forces. Knowing there are technologies capable of controlling the climate is terrifying, but what's worse is realizing how they are used to destroy lives and further the interests of a small, powerful group. After years trapped in this web of manipulation and secrets, I realized I couldn't continue any longer. The weight of what I knew was unbearable, and each new project only increased my fear and guilt. However, leaving this system was much more complicated than it seemed. I knew I was being monitored, and any misstep could result in irreversible consequences. The first thing I did was begin planning my escape in secret. I sold my possessions gradually to avoid raising suspicion. I started saving money in cash, avoiding leaving a digital trail. My goal was to disappear completely, leaving no clues about where I'd gone. It was a long, risky process. I knew that any behavior outside the norm could alert the managers, and they certainly wouldn't hesitate to eliminate me if they suspected I knew too much. When I finally gathered enough resources, I chose a remote location to hide, an isolated cabin in the mountains. There, I had no internet, phone, or any other means of communication. I needed to disappear entirely, both physically and digitally. The isolation was frightening, but, at the same time, the only way I felt safe. Every sound in the forest made me think someone was coming for me, but over time, I learned to live with that fear. The first few months were difficult. Beyond the solitude, I had to confront the ghosts of what I had witnessed. The faces of the people in the rituals, the symbols I had helped hide in the videos, the subliminal messages manipulating millions, all of it haunted me daily. There was no way to forget what I knew, and even though I was far from immediate danger, I still felt I was being watched. At some point, I realized isolation wasn't a definitive solution. Despite being safe, what I knew continued to gnaw at my mind. I decided I had to do something. Even if it was dangerous, I needed to expose the truth. I started documenting everything I remembered, writing in notebooks and storing the information in secure places. I knew that if something happened to me, someone would eventually find these records. Today, I still live in fear, but I am convinced my escape was necessary. There's no way to return to my old life, and even if I manage to expose everything I know, the chances of surviving it are slim. However, I'd rather take the risk than live in silence, carrying the burden of being complicit in something so monstrous. If my story can help open someone's eyes, it will have been worth it. After years in hiding, I decided I could no longer remain silent. What I saw and experienced was too significant to ignore. Even knowing that exposing this information could cost me my life, I felt it was my duty. Every day, more people were being manipulated, deceived, and used by this elite, and I could no longer be complicit. This is my confession, and perhaps my farewell. As I reflect on everything I've been through, I realize my journey was a mix of naivety and ambition. I entered the world of entertainment thinking it was a creative and inspiring environment, but I quickly discovered it was a machine of control and manipulation. SHAKIRA, the managers, the symbols, the rituals, all were part of a larger scheme. I was just a pawn, but even so, my participation helped perpetuate this cycle. I know many may doubt what I'm saying. After all, the idea of a global elite manipulating events, artists, and even the weather sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. But this is the reality I lived. Every word here is true, and as impossible as it may seem, I urge anyone reading this to look closer. The patterns are there, in the videos, the music, the daily events. All you have to do is observe. My greatest fear is that by revealing this, my life will be cut short. I know the elite has infinite resources to silence anyone who threatens to expose their secrets. However, living in silence is a burden I can no longer bear. I'd rather risk everything than continue hiding while millions of people are deceived every day. My story is not just a confession, it's a warning. Today, as I write these words, I feel I'm being watched. Perhaps it's paranoia, or perhaps they already know what I'm doing. It doesn't matter. If something happens to me, I hope these words reach the right people. The truth cannot be buried forever, and no matter how hard they try, there will always be someone willing to fight against this darkness. This is my final confession. I don't know how much time I have left, but I want you, the one reading this, to never accept things as they appear to be. Question, investigate, and above all, never allow them to take control of your mind. What they fear most is that the truth will come to light. And now, it's in your hands. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this mystery captivated you. But I bet you haven't seen everything yet. Click on the next videos now to continue your journey into the unknown. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next secrets I'm about to reveal. But be careful, once you step inside, there's no turning back.